Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Code. After a 2-week hiatus, took some time off to be with my family over Hanukkah. We're back with an amazing episode. Today I'm joined by Noah Perlman, who's the Chief Compliance Officer for Binance. Binance, for those of you who don't know, is the largest and most significant crypto exchange in the world. And Noah, as the Chief Compliance Officer, has perhaps the most important compliance role in the entire crypto ecosystem. Welcome to Beyond the Code, the podcast where industry experts and brilliant legal minds discuss the impact of new emerging technologies. I'm your host, Yitzy Hammer, a lawyer and tech enthusiast. Join us as we explore the legal, regulatory, and ethical issues surrounding AI, blockchain, and more. Get ready to go beyond the code and stay ahead of the game. Noah, welcome to Beyond the Code. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. It's been a long time coming. Whenever secretaries get involved, it's really hard to pin somebody down, but I'm happy that we're here and it's just two of us.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for your patience. And it's a nice way to start the new year.
Likewise. So I guess 2024 has been a crazy year for the industry in general, for Binance in particular. Tell me just from your standpoint. I mean, I know I'm going to do a whole intro afterwards, so I don't need to give you your whole CV now, but you've come from, I guess, the most traditional organizations. Like you were a assistant U.S. attorney, and then afterwards you worked at Morgan Stanley. Like these places, these are like the pillars of TradFi, okay, and of traditional government. What's it like coming to Binance, which is at the forefront of the most innovative aspect of finance and what I think is the future?
So look, it's been an amazing transition and I've been really fortunate. I mean, the way I sort of think of my career, it's really sort of three distinct buckets. So as you suggested, the first sort of post-law school, I had about a decade, a little less than a decade in government roles. I was a clerk. As you mentioned, I was an assistant U.S. attorney. That's, for those of the listeners don't know, that's a federal prosecutor. I also had a short but great stint as a counsel to the Drug Enforcement Administration in the U.S. And if we have time, we can sort of talk about some stories there. But really, that was sort of the first bucket number one, government. Bucket number two, almost 14 years in traditional finance at Morgan Stanley. And then most recently, I've got 5+ years in crypto, first at Gemini, which your listeners know are sort of Tyler and Cameron's founded exchange. And now the last 2 years, actually, just about to hit my 2-year anniversary at Binance. So 3 distinct experiences, all incredible, really fortunate to have them. And to get to your question, I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, Binance is remarkable in so many ways. So one of the things which is incredible about it is it just combines all the sort of spunk and spirit of a startup. Every user to us is precious. I mean, you really feel it from the founders on down. We just hit our 250 million registered users this month, which is remarkable, up from 170 million, I think, at the start of 24. So it's incredible growth. Every single one of these users is precious to us. We are so user focused. And that, I'll be honest with you, that's a little bit of a change from some other institutions that either I've been associated with or just know. And part of it is scale. I mean, when you've got that many users, you think to yourself, is every user really worth it? And there's going to be some friction, there's going to be some loss, but this is what we have to do. That's not the attitude here. So that's remarkable. And so on the one hand, we've got all that sort of that startup energy and excitement, but on the other hand, we're pretty mature. 5,000 plus employees, 250 million users, incredible volume. So it's great. It's a great place to work.
I want to go back to you, but since we're on Binance, whenever I think about Binance, and especially I think in your context, I'm reminded of Uncle Ben from Spider-Man's
with great power comes great responsibility.
With great power comes great responsibility. So on one hand, you're this insane superpower. You probably have so many resources available to you, and you wield this power as the largest and most reputable exchange in the industry. But with that comes also great responsibility. You're probably scrutinized more than any other player in the market, and everything that you do is looked at through a magnifying glass. So how do you find that balancing power, that balancing act, especially in your role as a compliance officer?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And look, it's one of the reasons I took the job was this sort of unique position to sort of set what crypto compliance should look like, what the model should look like for the next 5, 10 years. And obviously, when I say set, I mean I was not set alone. They're incredible crypto compliance professionals in this space now. I mean, there have been for some time, and I talk to my peers. But certainly, as one of the leading exchanges, we do have that unique responsibility to sort of set the framework because, as you suggest, as the market leader in almost every jurisdiction we operate, we are the natural, I don't want to say target, but maybe that is the right word, but we are the natural
You can
first
call a spade a spade.
first target, first port of call for regulators when they're sort of wanting to, maybe do their first exam, wanting to regulate. They will talk to us. We will be first. So part of that responsibility is helping to educate the regulators. And of course, you have to be careful. Those conversations have to be done carefully. Nobody wants to be sort of told by industry how to do something, what to do. On the other hand, look, we just got our most recent registration, our 21st registration in Brazil. We have the most registrations. We have the most experience at this. And if those dialogues happen the right way, we can help regulators, lawmakers, enforcement around the world say, look, this is what has worked. This is what works well. This is what works less well. We like to be a partner with them. Obviously, those conversations, you have to approach them with humility because certainly coming in and saying, hey, we know what we're doing. You don't know what you're doing. That's not going to be effective. Nor is that really right. I mean, there's stuff to learn in every jurisdiction we operate. So we come to those conversations and those dialogues with an open mind, wanting to really be a trusted partner. And we recognize that not every jurisdiction is the same. Some have different levels of sophistication, maturity, and some will also bring other preconceived notions about Binance. So sometimes we first have to sort of combat those. And those are conversations that are important to have, and we take them seriously.
Absolutely. But I feel like if anybody's going to educate the regulators, it's going to be people who were ex-regulators, ex-prosecutors. Like they probably feel less threatened when it's coming from a team of ex-superstars, right? Like I'm just looking at some of the people on your team, guys like Tigran and others. Like these guys were the best of the best before they went over to the dark side, let's say. And there needs to be some credibility to that, no?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's credibility. Look, we've assembled a team of experts with incredible experience. I mean, Tigran Gambaryan, you mentioned, and maybe we'll get to him and his sort of really horrific story from last year, which we end up with in a good place and that he's home. We'll talk about that. But certainly Tigran, we have others who have experience both on the law enforcement side, TradFi, regulators around the world. And I do think it does bring a certain credibility to those conversations. But, you can't just rest on your resume. I mean, obviously, you got to sort of deliver. And look, I'm reminded when I was a baby prosecutor, we call it baby prosecutor. When I was junior prosecutor, you used to joke, you'd have these veterans who had been former prosecutors. I mean, now I'm one of them, right? Who had been prosecutors 10, 15, 20 years ago. They come into their office on behalf of a defendant. And one of the first things they say, or within the first 5 minutes, if you don't know that they're a former prosecutor, they'll say, when I was in the office, and they try and make that rapport. And sometimes those conversations felt a little like, I don't want to say self-service is the wrong word, but they sort of felt sort of out of place. Like, let's talk about the facts. Other times, it's actually important to know,
like, don't come in here and try and endear yourself to me to win bonus points. So I get it.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you see, I mean, it's true. I mean, it is helpful to know, that, and I'd like to think that the experience of the team that we brought, not just in compliance, but across this company, often is helpful in those conversations. I'd like to think we've got some credibility. It varies again from conversation to conversation, but certainly the compliance team here, with complete support of senior management, we really are committed to doing the right thing. And hopefully that comes across when we have those conversations.
Okay, let's put Binance aside for a second and kind of go back to you. Tell me, first of all, a little bit about your background, okay? Like, I know what's on your CV, but I'd like to see it a little bit more from your perspective, okay? Like how from when you, I guess, graduated from law school, like how you ended up where you are today, and also just kind of what your genesis block was coming into crypto.
Yeah, sure.
Assuming that it's more than just the job offer to work at Gemini, like there must have been a kind of, a moment when you were first introduced to Bitcoin or to the idea of decentralization or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try and be brief. I actually did a roundtable once with some junior folks, and I asked them to sort of to go around the room quickly and give background. And one of the guys, great guy, but he literally, I think he started with preschool, and so I won't start there with my background. But, post law school, fairly traditional trajectory. I went to a big law firm based in New York, incredible training, had a federal clerkship, which led to exposure to sort of federal prosecutions in the criminal justice system. Had actually, in the back of my mind, always wanted to be a prosecutor. Was fortunate enough to get into the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I did that for about 5 years. The first sort of break with sort of a traditional path was when I took the job at the Drug Enforcement Administration. Typically, folks in my sort of trajectory, law firm, clerkship, or clerkship law firm, U.S. Attorney's Office, either would stay sort of on that prosecutorial track, maybe go to main justice. And I have some colleagues now, 20 years later, who are among the most senior folks there, or return to a big law firm, perhaps go in-house, that sort of tradition. The DEA role was a little just off-piste, as it were. And I remember seeking a lot of advice about whether I should do that. And most of the advice was, no, you should not do that because you'll be labeled as a sort of a drug lawyer. That's sort of all you do. It's too narrow. And actually, I'm a big believer normally in taking advice, or at least listening to it, but I sort of weighed the pros and cons. And at the end of the day, look, this was something I was really passionate about doing. I had worked very closely with the men and women of the Drug Enforcement Administration as a prosecutor. One of my jobs, I was a supervisor in the narcotics section. So these were real colleagues that I was, just sort of impressed with the mission, their work, and took the job. And it turned out to be, again, it was a relatively short stint, about 3 years, but absolutely fantastic in terms of the relationships I made, sort of seeing law enforcement from the law enforcement side. I mean, again, I was not a law enforcement agent. I was a lawyer there, but working hand in hand with the agents as they sort of navigated thorny issues.
Is it like they portrayed in the movies? Like the DA guys are always portrayed as these like tough cops that are like, going undercover and kind of like meshing with the bad guys also. Is that just a movie thing, or is it really like that?
No, it's not just a movie thing. It's actually, I think what the movies don't get on that is how thoughtful they are, in my experience. And, obviously, look, there's always going to be bad apples in any sort of agency. I mean, we used to say, anytime you had an agent, very rarely, but you have an agent maybe do something, improper, we'd say we hire from the human race. You do your best, but you're going to have a bad apple here and there, right? But the reality is most of these agents are incredibly dedicated to the mission. But when I say what's Hollywood doesn't necessarily capture is how thoughtful they are, many of them. And when I say thoughtful, look, there's a saying in the States, don't make a federal case out of it. There's lots of things you could prosecute, and having that discretion is super important. In the same way that there are lots of things you can investigate, and having the sort of discretion as to, okay, where should we spend our resources, and how should we interact? And I just found that a lot of that, the movies don't capture it, which is fine. But in any event, I love that time. And as I said, short stint, but just lifelong relationships that I still have. They're still super important to me. And it just goes to show, advice is fine to get and solicit, but at the end of the day, you sort of have to make decisions that make sense for you. So, so after that, I left only because the job really did, at least for me, it just really had a term. It wasn't a sort of a forever job for me. There wasn't, anything to sort of continue to sort of develop my career there. And so left on good terms, went back to the private sector, at Morgan Stanley, in just a series of absolutely great firm there, with incredible colleagues, and talk about another firm that's committed to doing the right thing. Morgan Stanley, I know, banks get a bad rap, but certainly,
especially in this industry,
especially in this industry, but that was a firm that, and again, like anything else, they had their share of scandals, share of misdeeds, but overall a company that from top down dedicated to doing the right thing. And fantastic job, as evidenced by the fact that I stayed 14 years. I ran special investigations when I started. That was sort of like call it the internal cops. Not really cops.
That was your move to compliance, right? Because before that, like you hadn't been wearing a compliance hat; you had been wearing a strictly legal hat.
So the special investigations was a legal role, and then I transitioned into a legal and compliance role when I took over the financial crimes portfolio. And
And it was also probably new to you, right? You hadn't come from like the RIS special investigations, like you came from the DEA. That's like the most far removed as possible from banking regulations.
well,
And
actually, I mean, yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, DEA, interestingly enough, a lot of it was there was a big aspect of follow the money.
mhm.
And, obviously there's the drug side, but there's also the money side. And actually, there are a number of DEA agents who really developed incredible expertise in sort of anti-money laundering cases. I mean, black market peso exchange, which I'm sure you've heard of, and some real sophistication there. So I had some exposure, but your point is taken and right. I mean, I had to learn a ton. And again, I give credit to the firm Morgan Stanley for taking a chance on me. I mean, here I am. At that point, basically a drug prosecutor. I'd run crimes against children or supervised that program for a bit, but did not have the real white collar background. And they again took a chance. I learned a ton there. And as you suggested, sort of transitioned into the compliance role where I had the way Morgan Stanley had it, at least when I was there, the financial crime program was both a legal and a compliance function. So I wore, obviously a lawyer by training. So I ran that. I had lawyers acting as lawyers as well as compliance professionals. And it was an interesting time to be in anti-financial crime because I really traced back, and maybe we'll get to this when we talk about crypto a little bit more, is at least in the US, right around, I'd say 2013, so we're going back 12 years, there really was sort of a fundamental change in the way regulators sort of approached AML and their sort of examination of it. And I trace it back, and again, listeners may have a different view, but I really trace it back to sort of HSBC, and in particular, some issues they had with some money laundering, and I don't know whether it was an affiliate or a subsidiary in Mexico doing some money laundering. They got in trouble money laundering for one of the Mexican cartels. And in particular, there were hearings in the United States at which one of the regulators was particularly criticized for not doing a sophisticated and a rigorous job in examining the bank for money laundering concerns. And like everything else, the pendulum then swung dramatically. And so all of these institutions, which up until that point, they were running programs and maybe there was some issues here and there, but the degree of scrutiny and the number of consent decrees and fines just sort of completely changed from that point on. And what had been acceptable was no longer acceptable. Everybody had to uplift their programs. And so I had joined I'd already been at Morgan Stanley, but I had just joined what at the time was AML. We sort of moved it into a more holistic financial crimes program, but right when that was happening. So all of a sudden had to sort of build and uplift the program. And it was just challenging, but also just, learned a ton.
Yeah.
Engaging. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then, all right, I started this
I'm sitting on the edge of my seat here. No, I told you, deep dive, man. You're doing great.
So one of the things that, not unique to Morgan Stanley, one of the things at big banks, they love their committees. I sat on a committee, it goes by different names at different banks. Some call it reputational.
What year are we at now?
So now we are,
okay.
I'm accelerating to 2018, 2017, around there.
Okay. So
maybe
crypto bull market.
Yeah. And I sat on one of the committees I sat on. I was saying these committees go by different names. Some call them the reputational risk committee. Sometimes they're called franchise committee. Other banks have different names. But basically, these are committees that are often internal to the bank, established to assess whether or not a bank should do a piece of business, and not often divorced from the commercial aspect of it, and divorced actually from the legal aspect. In other words, if it gets, each bank does it differently, but in my experience, like if it gets to the committee, it's okay, there's a commercial reason to do it, it's legal, but now should we do it? Is this consistent with our risk appetite, just for reputation? And it may be
from a risk perspective, or from like a moral, ethical perspective.
Both. In other words, it's kind of together. In other words, like
they jive, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of, it can be also, it could be political. Like, is this, and to be very clear, any example I'm giving is not a Morgan Stanley example. I'm just making stuff up now, right? Just to be clear.
All disclaimers noted.
Yeah. No, and it really is true. But like, for example, the type of issue, like, what are you talking about? Okay, well, do we want to do this banking deal for a gun manufacturer? Totally legal. Is this something we want to do? And the answer may be yes, maybe, and you can think of other things, gambling, stuff that's all legal but has some potential risk. So those are the types of things that that may come to the committee. So we had a subcommittee of one of these committees, which I sat in, which was evaluating crypto opportunities that were coming to the firm, digital assets and cryptos. And that was my first exposure to, in a real meaningful way, to digital assets, crypto, to this whole ecosphere. And like many others, became incredibly interested in it and became convinced that this was going to be a significant part of the future of finance. And I say significant part because I'm not, even to this day, when people say the future of finance, it implies that it's going to replace it. I don't think it's replacing many aspects of traditional finance, but I think it's supplementing it, added to it. I think there will be some things that will be completely disrupted as a result of digital assets, blockchain, et cetera. But certainly it will be additive and an important part. And that became clear to me as I got exposed to these different opportunities. And, as a side note, I'll say that, at the time that we were evaluating opportunities, I don't think that there was anything that we saw that we actually did or engaged with. And yet 7 years later, I don't know what the most recent numbers that Morgan Stanley announced, but I think something like maybe $500 million in exposure to Bitcoin ETFs. That may be an inflated number. I think Goldman similar, if not more. So, it's just incredible in such a short period of time, from almost no opportunities to billions in exposure. It's amazing.
Do you remember what those initial opportunities that were that you guys were evaluating? Do you remember if it was like a project, an ICO, like what it was that just like you went home and you like read through the white paper or whatever, and you're like, oh, this could be cool?
My recollection is no ICOs. It was really around concepts, how are we going to use, whether it was developing sort of blockchain for settlement or other sort of opportunities. I'll be honest, my recollection, there weren't a ton. This wasn't a committee that had a huge workload, but there were definitely opportunities that we were looking at. And I do remember it was comprised, look, Morgan Stanley, all these banks, there's some incredible brains there, in terms of intellectual firepower who really understand finance. And we were fortunate to have people on the committee. And the committee was somewhat self-selected. People were interested in crypto and had that sort of mindset. And when I had the opportunity to leave and go to Gemini, and I always ask advice. I certainly asked some members of that committee. Those were among the only people who thought it was a good idea. The committee members, the rest of the people I talked to in the firm, again, thought,
because so many people don't understand these issues. They don't understand the technologies. They're scared of them. So like the natural inclination is to say, oh, it's a scam. But when you actually understand it to a deeper level, there may be something here.
Exactly. Well, there's a bit of, I'd call it sort of Western hubris. When you haven't lived, and I haven't, but I can put myself in the shoes, but like if you haven't ever experienced hyperinflation, or you haven't ever been underbanked or know anybody that's underbanked, it's easy to be like, well, what's the use case? I don't see it. I don't need it. Who needs it? I often found some of the sort of most severe critics of it sort of suffering from that sort of unconscious bias, where they're just sort of sitting here in New York, Miami, LA, maybe not Miami where I am now, and being, writing these screeds against crypto because they just see it as a solution in search of a problem. Well, they've never had the problem. And so, always I try and come to those conversations, not with hostility, but trying to educate. And I'm always just disappointed when people, especially smart people, don't come with an open mind to it, even though they'll always say, I come with an open mind. And you're like, nah, I'm not seeing anything open there.
Okay. So then you came to Gemini at a time that probably was pretty challenging also. Like, what was it, 2021?
2019.
So you were there for like a peak of a bull run where like everything that they touched turned to gold. But then like at the middle of 2022, Gemini was in a tricky place. And it must have been like a wild ride for you to come in at a point where it was like on such a high, and then for the first time ever, like I guess from the inside, to experience crypto's lows, which are not easy. They're not for the faint of heart.
Definitely not. You've got to have a stomach for volatility in this space. But look, I had been at Morgan Stanley in 2008. I went home on a Friday not knowing if we would be open for business on a Monday. So I've got the stomach for the volatility, having lived through that. And the other thing is, at Gemini, especially, you have the OG of the OGs in Tyler and Cameron. And so during that volatility, I mean, talk about people who can sort of steady the ship, who've lived through it. It was really very helpful to have them at the top of the house leading that. But yeah, it's wild to have lived through that. And the highs are incredibly heady. You just, the users coming in, the volumes, but then you have to also be prepared for the sort of lulls. And hopefully that volatility will start to smooth. And I think it has smoothed a little bit. I have to look exactly, but or maybe I'm just more used to it.
It's hard for anybody to understand what you've been through because you've only worked at the two most reputable companies in the industry. Everybody else is kind of there are so many players in the crypto sphere, and most of them don't have nearly as much credibility as those two. So on one hand, you've been the most exposed ever. On the other hand, you've been exposed at like a rich boy level. Let's say it like that.
It's a little bit. It's that, but it's also. And look, I mean, obviously, again, this is self-selecting. I mean, I wouldn't go to a place, nor I shouldn't say not me. A place wouldn't hire me, and I wouldn't go to a place that isn't committed to sort of a compliant way
Absolutely.
of doing things, because that's what I bring.
Because you're a compliance dude.
I'm a compliance dude, and one of the things. Look, before I joined Binance, I spent a fair amount of time talking to the founders and leaders. It's really important to me that they weren't just like, okay, we got to get a credential. We've had some issues in the past, and it's important to us to get somebody. I don't know if you can see the gray in my beard, but to get somebody who's been around a bit, who will signal to the market. I mean, that's part of it, but I also had to get assurances. I mean, on both sides,
going to be able to actually build a compliance team and work towards compliance.
Yeah, and that they were committed to it, and they were, and they are. I mean, the last 2 years have shown that. I mean, we've had invested literally hundreds of millions of dollars in the compliance program each year. I've only been here 2 years, but in the 2 years we've invested hundreds of millions. The spend has increased. I expect the spend will increase again in 25. The hiring has increased. So it's not just that they've said it; they put their money where their mouth is. In terms of giving the department the resources it needs to do an effective job. And so, everything that was, I don't want to say promising, but all my sort of instincts in terms of deciding to take the job so far have been validated in terms of their commitment. I mean, it hasn't been easy, that's for sure. But
I'm sure. That's what I wanted to ask you. Like, on the one hand, there's the commitment towards obtaining this insane goal of remaining compliant across so many jurisdictions where Binance is active. And I think you guys have like the most licenses of any other crypto chains, like
21.
But who's counting? So it's one thing to obtain the licenses, another one to maintain them, right? Like once you have those licenses, you still have to stay compliant in all those jurisdictions. Like it must be an insane task that you have to maintain compliance across so many regulatory frameworks when you're being, so heavily scrutinized by all those regulators, not to mention the ones that have, taken actions against you that you've settled with, and then likely signaling to other regulators like, hey, we're here for a handout. Is that something that you had to grapple with, where like people are like, write me a check. Come on, man. What's another $1 million for you guys? What's another 10, 100 million? It must be like an incredible challenge, no?
Look, everything you've said is spot on. So there's part of that. I mean, again, not unique to crypto. We saw this with the mortgage crisis. Every regulator, put their hands out for the banks. Look, we saw it more recently with the careful, with the communications, the cell phone the messaging in the U.S. The SEC basically suing every single bank for allowing its clients to text message it. Another podcast will talk all about that, which is another issue. But yes, so there is that aspect of, sort of combating just sort of copycat suits around the world. There is keeping the licenses. And then there's just the general challenge of operating a compliance program at this scale. When you have as many users as we do, everything is magnified. Like if you have, compliance programs are not supposed to be perfect. You take a risk-based approach. You design policies, procedures, programs that are fit for purpose, that are effective, and occasionally you'll get it wrong. You may get it wrong because of a fundamental break in the system, or you may have tuned something wrong. The problem at scale is when that gets wrong, you can end up with just a massive
domino effect of Yeah.
Exactly. And then cleaning up, it's not just coming into the regulators and saying, oh, we missed KYC on 100 users. It's like, oh, we missed it on 100,000 users. And that's the problem.
The challenge.
Matt Levine, the sort of the Bloomberg writer who writes, just fantastic writing. He has an analogy he uses on AML, financial crime issues, which I love. He talks about a dial, and you tune the dial. You can tune it one way. I mean, if you tuned it all the way, right, you'd have no business. You tune it the other way, and you have business, but you have more, more financial crime risk, AML risk. And, you tend to sort of tune it till you have more business, less financial crime risk until you have a mistake. Then you tune it back, and you sort of, it's constant.
It's a balancing act. Yeah.
Constant down. Yeah. I mean, we could have no financial crime. We'd have no business.
They'd find another exchange.
Exactly.
Without a compliance program.
No, you're making the argument we make all the time, which is.
I mean, I love all the war stories, like Andy Greenberg's book of Tracers in the Dark, and another one I read recently called Rinsed, which goes through all these various money laundering schemes. And in all of them, it comes back to following the money. And in most cases, you follow the money to some shady exchange that doesn't have a Noah Perlman sitting at the top. And so you need to have those compliance checks. But like you said, if you're overly compliant, then you're turning away business. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be compliant. I'm just saying that it really is a balancing act, and it's very, very hard. And I applaud you for your efforts.
Yeah, well, it is challenging. And look, and on that, one of the challenges that we have, I mean, other firms have it too, but certainly we have it, I think, as much, if not more than anybody, is what inferences do the regulators and law enforcement lawmakers draw when you have a mistake? We recognize, given crypto, given Binance's past in particular, that we may have some credibility, that we may have some trust to rebuild, and we think we've done a good job of it, but we have to continue to do that. And, we have a mistake. There's some regulators say, oh, it's a mistake, fix that. Others may say, it's crypto again. You guys don't really care. You're turning a blind eye to what you need to do. My argument often is, obviously each situation is different, but look, as I said, harping on how many users we have and how volume, there is no single user, there is no single piece of business that turns the dial for us. To think that we would sort of sacrifice our reputation, all the stuff we've done over the last few years to sort of rebuild our program for a particular client or piece of business, it's just not the case. And we've got the numbers to show that. So hopefully we make those arguments, we make them a little bit more politic than the way I've just said it, and try and put the framework in place and show sort of everything we've been doing. But that's the advantage of SOC. We talked about some of the disadvantages, but one of the big advantages, there isn't a single piece of business that's worth sacrificing our reputation and what we're trying to build here.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
So another thing I wanted to ask you about, again, I don't know if you feel comfortable, but Tigran, thankfully, is home. It was definitely something that, at least in my circles, was consuming a lot of our thoughts over the last several months. And I'm just curious to know how that affected your team, and whatever you could tell me about how Tigran's doing, and just whatever you feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah, sure. Look, for the listeners who aren't as close to Tigran Gambaryan, runs financial crimes compliance for us. One of the most decorated IRS criminal investigation special agents in the field in terms of crypto, has done some of the most important cases. You mentioned Andy Greenberg's book, Tracers in the Dark.
He's Absolutely. Like the superhero of the book.
Yeah, fantastic book and fantastic portrayal of Tigran. So that's his background. I sort of won't belabor it, but he went to Nigeria almost a year ago, at the Nigerian government's invitation. We had worked with him in the past on a number of issues. He was there to sort of work to sort of, I don't want to even say testify, it wasn't formal testimony, but to sort of participate in a couple of different committee meetings. Testify, I suppose, is the right word. At the end of one of those meetings, he and along with another colleague were actually detained, passports confiscated. They remained in custody until the colleague actually escaped, at which point things for Tigran got worse. He was moved into a real notorious prison. He was individually charged with tax evasion and money laundering along with the firm. And then
how insane is that? That guy who spent his entire life combating financial crimes and money laundering is charged with money laundering on his own. And the whole story is like out of a movie, with the escaping and he got sick, and I saw some of the videos. It's like You can't make this
No,
shit up.
it's absolutely outrageous. And look, I talk about, when I used to talk about it while he was still in custody, I had a hard time talking about it without cheering up. I mean, it was devastating. I mean, look, devastating to him and his family beyond, I can't even imagine. I really can't even imagine. But certainly in terms of how look, he's beloved here. And in terms of how it affected the team, it was, it had a huge impact. And there were, to your point, I mean, I won't get into all the details, but we had a team here working behind the scenes, daily, hourly, trying to pull whatever levers we could to ultimately get him home. And there were lots of people internally, externally that helped. And he is home with his family. He's back. And yeah, it's just remarkable. But yeah, I mean, that's just gratified that we're having the conversation with him.
I'm happy it has a
not in
happy
Nigeria.
ending. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Wow. Okay. No, I know, like, here in Israel, we have this horrible situation with hostages, and it's very difficult to do things that make you happy, that you celebrate, when your friends and relatives have friends and relatives who are still imprisoned, and you feel kind of guilty about that. I can imagine that over the past year, members of the team who were celebrating all different kind of things, you feel almost guilty, but at the same time, people have to go on with their lives. So I'm happy this is a happy ending there.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. I think there's definitely some of that. But interestingly, to the extent that there was anything positive in terms of like the impact, and I had this, and I know some of my colleagues had this too, is it really did put things in perspective, in the sense that I want to make sure I articulate this in a way that's not callous, but I mean, this is true. You'd be sitting and stuff in your day-to-day life that would cause you incredible aggravation. Oh, I'm in traffic. Oh, the subway's not coming on time. And I would think to myself, I am not in Nigeria in a prison. So things are absolutely fantastic for me. And it again, I mean, I don't want to use his or anybody's situation as a tool to make myself feel better, but the reality is it does put things in perspective. Things could be a lot worse. And so, yeah, but look, it was, I mean, I'll conclude on to saying he demonstrated absolutely superhuman strength and resolve to get through that.
Wow.
We were able to communicate to him through official channels, through his lawyers and some other ways. And throughout it all, just kept spirits up, even kept a sense of humor. And I know it was devastating for him and his family, but he's really just a remarkable person.
With advancements in AI and machine learning, how do you see these technologies transforming compliance in crypto? And is this something that you guys are implementing in Binance, or that you would like to implement in the future?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you asked it, because it's one of the things I'm most excited about, AI in particular. I mean, machine learning was already, well enforced on a lot of this stuff. But did you ever see the old Tom Cruise movie Minority Report?
Of course.
Right. So I think, well, first of all, we already are starting to use AI in the financial crime space in sort of limited ways, piloting it more. But I actually really do think it is a huge part of the future of better financial crime risk management, in the sense that, look, again, for people less familiar with sort of financial crime mechanisms, one of the biggest problems is separating signal from noise in anti-financial crime work. I mean, you think about, airport security. You screen millions of people, tens of millions of people every day, because somebody once had an explosive in their shoe. Everybody has to take their shoe off. You don't actually get, you get very few hits. Financial crime is the same way. We screen millions of transactions. Every single person is KYC'd. We run name screens lists for tiny fractions of people doing bad things. Where I think AI can really help is minimizing friction to the vast majority of legitimate users, because you'll start to see profiles, trends. You'll start to bring in disparate data points to really present a really accurate picture of where financial crime may happen. But in addition to sort of that, it can then also help with the follow-up, whether it's SAR writing, other documentation. And then what that will allow you is, with the same resources, you can do sort of just more effective, tailored approach, and more, not just more effective, both on the law enforcement detection side, and more minimizing friction to the users. When compliance and financial crime is effective, right? Nobody it's in the background. The user doesn't know about it. The business doesn't even know about it. They're just running their business.
That's how it should be. It should be seamless. It should be seamless.
So I think I'm really optimistic. One of the great things about Binance and one of the great things about crypto in general is, you've got this sort of marriage. We're in finance, but we've got these incredible tech brains, people who gravitate towards this technology, who have just incredible abilities, and who are interested. And as a result, you can build things in a way that is faster and more nimble than perhaps in other industries. I mean, look, I have in my compliance, but I have over 100 engineers, tech engineers, just dedicated to compliance. It's unheard of.
To building tools for you to use
Building to,
internally?
building tools.
Because it seems that a lot of the tools that people are using, like I'm not looking to badmouth anybody, but like Chainalysis and other ones, are like somewhat antiquated. Like we're like a burgeoning industry, and like they've only been around for a few years, but I don't see enough innovation coming out of these type of tools that I would expect to see with the pace of AI and other innovative tools. Is this like, are these the kind of things that you guys are building internally? Things to supplement
We
those tools, or
Yeah, so we take a mixed approach. Like we have relationships with sort of probably all the big chain analytics firms, and I think we haven't disagreed much, Yitzy. But I actually do think there's some good innovation coming out of some of these shops. So on that one, but I get your point, and certainly Binance way is to build. We think we have as good, if not better, technologists than anyone. And obviously we're in the space, so we sort of supplement. So our approach is always, I shouldn't say always, but where appropriate, we'll use outside vendors in some of this stuff, but then we'll also build our own tools. It actually gives you the broadest coverage,
for sure.
and we're constantly innovating here, and pushing to do some innovative things. Unfortunately, this is one of the areas where, and again, I saw this in TradFi too, where the regulators have certain expectations, and sometimes it's easier to convince them, oh, here's the gold standard outside vendor, this is who we use, versus no, our tool is better. And so as a result, you sort of maybe run them parallel until you get everybody comfortable.
If you could afford it.
Yes.
Yeah. So that you've spoken at length about how Binance internally is building towards regulation of the future, building tools and thinking forward. Where do you think, and obviously nobody knows, where do you think that regulation is going? In just a few days, President Trump is going to come in. We're going to see a new administration in the United States, which is to date been seen as like a hostile regulatory environment for the crypto industry. It looks like things are going to go 180 there. That probably will likely have a very great impact on the entire industry. What are your thoughts on that?
Totally agree. I mean, I do. Again, your listeners don't know me, so I'm typically not that Pollyanna, like but I do think this next couple years, at least, is going to be a sort of almost a golden age, because I think we're going to get clarity in the U.S. And look, finance, we don't even operate in the U.S., but the U.S. obviously a huge market, sets the standard, and I think we have a administration that is open to crypto in a way that the previous one perhaps was not. I think that we have an opportunity to get some clarity
No, it
in terms
wasn't.
of to get some regulatory clarity. Any prominent exchange will tell you, even if they don't necessarily agree with all the regulation, let's get some clarity so that we have a rule book. Now, then we can discuss the rules. But if we don't even know what rule book we need to adhere to, very challenging to operate. And then the sort of U.S., I mean, it's incredible timing. So you have the administration change, and the various agencies that will change as a result of that, combined with sort of the tailwinds of last year and the incredible institutional adoption and institutional sort of flooding into the space. It is really going to create, I think, just incredible opportunities for the industry. It's going to be fun this year.
Yeah, I'm excited. Okay, so it's always good to leave with a little bit of hopium. Do you have any messages you want to leave with our audience? Maybe we get a lot of lawyer listeners or compliance leads who listen. For somebody who's looking to build a career in compliance, what kind of advice would you give them to help them navigate this very dynamic and often unpredictable landscape?
Yeah, so look, there's incredible opportunities in crypto compliance. So for people who are actually at any stage of their career, mid, junior, senior, we're looking for a ton of people. I know firms are looking. So one is, I would say, it's never too late in your career, even if you've got no crypto experience at all, because certainly we need people with those fundamental compliance skills. But one of the most important things when we interview, I mean, there are lots of things, but and this happens every bull market. You have people flooding in, and you start to ask them about crypto, and it's pretty superficial, their knowledge. I don't expect people to come in who've never been in the space and the compliance, side to be crypto experts. That's not what we're talking about. But we want people who aren't just in it because this is the bull market, who really have some conviction, some interest in the space. I'll ask open-ended questions. What do you see the best use cases for crypto in the next 5 years? I actually don't know there's no right answer to that.
No, it just, you see if somebody has a curious mind and if they're interested in the industry. We're hiring now, so I've asked very similar questions.
Yeah, exactly. Have they given it some thought? Crypto is interesting. It's one of these fields, you're only like probably 3 or 4 books away from being an expert, right? I mean, from the time
it's true. It's true.
From the time we give you notice of an interview to the time you can probably read them and come in. But it's really about an interest in the space and the conviction of the space. Not for everybody. Again, I have an open mind about it. I have deep conviction, incredible conviction in this. But if somebody doesn't, that's fine. But then this is the industry.
And this is not the job for you. Yeah. So basically, have a curious mind. That's, I think,
curious mind and curious mind, beginner's mind. All this, it's super important. It's one of the things that's kept. I'm not to date myself, but I've been at this a long time. I've been working a long time. And one of the greatest things about crypto is it keeps things fresh. You come with beginner's mind, you learn things, new ways of doing things, surrounded by young people who are, have incredible resilience and interest. It's great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Noah. This is great, and I look forward to having more conversations in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, Yitzy. Great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Code. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share with your friends, and to tune in again next week for more fun and insightful conversation.